Hi everyone, and welcome to today's video tutorial with me, Jo Herbert, for Wow Embossing Powder. Now I'm going to start off this year with a traditional watercolor heat embossed image because this is my go-to method, and I wanted to show you the basics that I do. So, and how I color in what I use. So I always tend to gravitate towards embossing powders gold, in superfine, the opaque white, and the ebony. So you can see the three colors here that are heat embossed on watercolor cardstock. Now I range between two watercolor cardstock companies, Ranger and Uniquely Creative. So an Australian brand and then an international brand. What I am using, which is not markers I usually use, but I do love the brightness of these. So when I want to feel really bright and cheery, these are my go-to colors. These are my go-to markers. So these are the Ecoline brush pen markers. As you can see, I only have a handful. I find that with that little mixing palette on the right hand side, I can achieve and mix most of my colors that I would like and want with this palette. So I may, look, they're not cheap markers here in Australia, but they're definitely worth the investment because I've had these now since the beginning of 2022, I'm pretty sure. I probably use these maybe about once a month, and I love them. I absolutely love them, and I love that I can get them locally here in Australia. Now I use aqua brush markers, but I've decided to use round brushes today, a fine tip and then a round brush. One of my go-to methods is to add watercolor. These markers grab really well to the watercolor cardstock. So what I like to do is saturate the cardstock a little bit more, because that way I'm able to create a little bit more of a bloom effect. And the bloom effect is that I can achieve more a translucent type of watercoloring and stretch those colors out to create like a lighter color. So the more water you add, obviously the lighter the color, and vice versa. The more pigment you add, of the markers, the more stronger the color is. So I'm just showing you a little bit of the technique here of how I bloom to achieve it. Now you can see I put a lot of water into that as a base, and then slowly adding. So what I tend to do, I tend to work in layers. I work per petal and per flower. I try to add the water per flower and not try and cross mix in my flowers per flower, just so that I can concentrate on one floral image at a time. And I always try and keep that bigger round brush clean. So you'll see me dip that into the water quite often. I like to have a clean brush so I can spread that color around. And then I take my time. I will go and revisit. Now, I am dealing with watercolor cardstock, so it is absolutely more forgiving. I use a thick cardstock, and that way I can add layers. Here's the image up close, and I use a little bit of purples and yellows, and you can see I'm adding more markers to my little palette. Now this is a cheapy palette that I got from the cheap store, the $2 store. We call it Crazy Clark's here in Australia, or Silly Solly, so don't know what you have there where you are. Every place seems to have a little $2 shop, and I like using these kind of palettes because I can pick up colors really easily. Now I also have like a little water bottle. Now what I wanted to do, I wanted to layer this particular color, which is like the pastel rose, is really, really light. So I actually created a really light wash of this color by adding a little bit of water, but still enjoying that lightness and pastel-y look. Then what I'll do is I'll pick up the darker pink, and I think it's just carmine, and slowly add some depth as I go to each of the colors. What I also have here on the right hand side is a microfiber cloth. So if I am oversaturating my brush, I will then wipe it onto the microfiber cloth, and I tend to use that in between colors and make sure I have a little bit more control of how much water is on my brush, how much pigment's on my brush, and it gives me personally a little bit more control on the colors and the variation that I'm playing with throughout my project. Another technique I like to use is direct application of the marker, especially if it's a very light marker. I know that I can slowly add some more intense color without oversaturating, without creating any pilling, I can also pull some of that color with the brush out. So here is another method I use. I tend to use this only with my light colors. I can create little shadows and more in depth, especially I didn't want to keep layering that light pastel pink to achieve this look because I want to avoid any pilling, and this was my easy method, very light-handedly adding that shadow and detail to this coloring. So I have sped this process. I didn't want to bore you too much, but I did want to highlight this particular technique that I also use in some of my watercoloring, and this is this floral with that technique. I have gone ahead and watercolored the other images in, and I've die cut them with some Paper Roses rectangle die, just some added interest. Some of these have like a little piercing detail and some of them has been straight cut. I've matted them on black cardstock on a 5x7 card base because these are large images. Now I've also used some fab foilers and fab foil, which I've heat embossed some sentiments. Now these are available online, both UK and US. They have an array of patterns and an array of sentiments and an array of foiling. Now these are toner foil, so they take well to heat through a laminator or your Heidi Swap Mink machine. So I've gone ahead, matted the sentiments on black cardstock, some of them, and then finished today's card creations. They're really simple. It's just a way to use your large images and just show you a little bit of a technique on how I've done it. Now I do go ahead and color some more in. It's very addictive. This is what I do pretty much on my downtime when I work full time, so I tend to use watercoloring as my therapy. Let me know, what do you use as your therapy? All right, everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's card creations. Thank you for my first video back for 2023. Have a blessed year. Bye.